Dopamine is a monoamine that is closely associated with the reward center of the brain. It controls mood and focus. Serotonin and norepinephrine are very similar monoamines and neurotransmitters. Normally, tyrosine, represented by white nerds, is taken into a dopaminergic neuron by a tyrosine transporter. Tyrosine is then hydroxylated into dopa, represented by the white good and plenty. Dopa is then carboxylated into dopamine, represented by the pink good and plenty. Dopamine is then taken up in synaptic vesicles by a vesicular monoamine transporter known as VMAT2. This red foil is VMAT2. In order to release the neurotransmitter dopamine from the vesicle, an axis potential transmits to voltage gate calcium channels. Calcium comes in and triggers vesicle fusion and exocytosis of dopamine into the synaptic gap. Dopamine can bind to dopamine receptors to cause the desired effect. Once the dopamine unbinds, it is taken back up through dopamine reuptake transporters, DAT, where it can be metabolized or recycled back through VMAT into the vesicle and participate in dopaminergic neurotransmission signaling. ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is a disease characterized by having abnormally low levels of neurotransmitters such as dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine during the cortical area and the basal ganglia, which are closely associated with the reward center of the brain. As previously stated, these neurotransmitters regulate mood, focus, and brain activity. So people with ADHD and ADD have trouble focusing and remaining dialed in. Amphetamine, represented by these coffee beans, is a central nervous system stimulant used to treat ADHD, ADD, and narcolepsy. Common brands are Adderall and Vyvanse. Once ingested, amphetamine enters the dopaminergic neuron through dopamine reuptake transporters, DAT, and it binds to these transmitters, which blocks dopamine reuptake through competitive inhibition. Calcium and sodium also come in, which increases intercellular calcium, sodium, and amphetamines. Amphetamines act on other monoamine transporters, not just DAT. Norepinephrine and serotonin transporters are also affected, but in this example, we focus on dopamine. Once inside the intercellular area, amphetamine targets vesicular monoamine transmitters, or VMAT2. Amphetamine acts as a substrate for VMAT2, causing synaptic vesicle depletion. This displaces dopamine out of the vesicle, which dramatically increases cytoplasmic concentrations of dopamine. While this is going on, the DAT, which rely on co-transporters of sodium down their gradient, have the amphetamine binding as a substrate and the sodium binding, which causes the DAT transporters to start reverse transport, or efflux, through the plasma membrane. This causes a massive outflow of dopamine through membrane transporters, leading to increased extracellular concentrations of dopamine, which are now able to bind continuously to postsynaptic receptors, thus producing the desired effect. There is a very similar process with other monoamines like norepinephrine and serotonin with their own transporters and receptors in other neurons.